Let's get a word on this with Charlie Downs, political commentator and all-round good bloke. Happy Christmas to you, Charlie.
Cheers, Ian. Merry Christmas to you too.
Nice to have you with us, as ever. I mean, let's just start then on that story of reform. It's an extraordinary tale, claiming that they have officially passed the Conservatives' membership numbers. Let's have a listen to Mr Farage's reaction yesterday.
We're there now.
How many more to go? In fact,
We've done it. We're through. We're through. How about that? The official opposition. It's going to be a long day.
So there it is. What are you making of this then, Charlie? I mean, there seems to be a little bit of a squabble between Mr Farage and Kemi Badenoch on how these numbers were arrived at. What's your take on this?
Oh, reform, where to begin? So I've been in the kind of reform orbit for a couple of years at this point. I did an internship with them when I was at university, so I've known these people for quite a while. I've been a supporter of them, kind of on and off over the course of those few years. I think that the Conservative Party is dead. I'm not a conservative. I don't think of myself as a conservative. I think that conservatism as a political ideology is not what's needed in this country right now because it's far too cautious, it's far too afraid of radical change. But right now what we need in this country is radical change. And I belong to a contingent, a small contingent, but rapidly growing contingent of young people who have a real appetite for something a little bit more radical, a little bit more exciting, a little bit more forward-facing. And I think that that is really what reform is tapping into. However, what I would say is that the question in politics is always of quality as against quantity. So I think that it's impressive that Reform have more members than the Conservative Party now. But if that doesn't translate to real policy and a real offering, then it doesn't really mean anything. Because your question there about which Reform policy is one's favourite, I think is actually quite a difficult question to answer, because I don't really see much in the way of a real meaty kind of policy platform that they're offering people. And this, I think, is the problem with populism, because as much as conservatism is a discredited ideology, I actually think populism is not all it's cracked up to be. I think populism is more of a style, it's more of a rhetorical style than it is an actual...
It's a feeling as well, isn't it?
Exactly, it's a vibe, it's a style, more than it is an actual political platform, because populism really is just giving the crowd what it wants, whereas leadership is taking the crowd forward, telling the crowd what they need. And that I don't think anybody is really doing in British politics at the moment. And maybe this is a fundamental problem with democracy, because it does kind of select for leaders who do just give the crowd the red meat that they want. But I think that if Reform and Farage are to move beyond merely being outside agitators and transition into being a potential party of government, I think we need to see a transition away from this kind of old boys down the boozer, like it's all jokes and, you know, and a bit of fun thing, to an actual serious offering. Because again, as I say, I am somebody who is, you know, I'm deeply skeptical of liberalism. I think that liberalism has failed. I think that this country has been on the wrong course basically for my entire life. I was born in 2001. I've only ever known this nation as an economic zone, a multicultural space that doesn't really have much in the way of its own culture, has no kind of desire to defend, protect, promote, and maintain its own culture. I look at the offerings when it comes to the economy, and I think, you know, I'm getting married next year. How the hell am I ever going to afford a house? Because the housing market is so in such tatters because of immigration and various other economic policies. That is the kind of edifice that young people are looking at. Yeah. And we don't want the kind of all singing, all dancing thing that Reform kind of is right now. We want a serious, you know, a kind of quite intense.
So so are you a sort of tacit Reform supporter now? As you say, you did work experience with them. You've been on and off in terms of unequivocal support. Where are you at the moment then on this scale, Charlie?
Well, as I say, yeah, I did a work experience with them, and I have also worked for them as well. And so I know this machine from the inside reasonably well. I think that Reform is the best vehicle for kind of radical politics of the type that I represent to actually make its way into the halls of power. And I think that in our system, you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think that there has to be a recognition of the fact that no other meaningful alternative is going to come into existence between now and the next general election. And I don't think the Conservative Party, I think there's some real talent there, but I think that it's dominated by incredibly mediocre, incredibly unimpressive.
Yeah, and I absolutely right. Mediocre is the right word. And you look back at the kind of, you know, when people talk about Thatcher, that whole era, which was, you know, very defined example of what conservatism is. It was about change. They were kind of, if you like, the Reform Party of that era back in the 70s, when Labour were falling apart all over the place. And along came Mrs T with a big, bold idea. That was real reform.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, as much as we can look back at these figures like Thatcher, I actually think part of Reform's problem is they are too reliant on kind of drawing on these motifs from the past. Because you look at their economic platform and it's entirely Thatcherite. You listen to the kind of appeals they make and it's all kind of Churchill and World War II imagery. And I think I'm going to be honest with you, that just doesn't play anymore. It doesn't have the bite that it used to have. Because when it comes to the economic side, young people especially, what we're crying out for is not the free market. We don't want free trade and freedom and this sort of thing. We've had that. And what that's done is it's turned our country into an economic zone that doesn't have a culture. What we want is economic security. What we want is the ability to own private property and buy it at a reasonable price. And I also worry as well with Reform about the social side, because I look at the fact that 3 out of their 5 MPs voted in favour of assisted dying. I also look at the way that they treat critics like my friend Connor Tomlinson and Miriam Cates, the way that the criticisms, legitimate criticisms about the lack of platform are received. And it's always in very bad faith. That, I think, is concerning. I think that this, and I say this as a critical friend, I'm a member of the party. I am one of these 100 and however many thousand members. All I want to do is see this party become what it could be. Because you look at the European scene, you look at the kind of the right-wing dissident parties in Europe, you look at the National Rally in France, the AfD in Germany, the Freedom Party in Austria, and these are serious, young, radical parties. And they are taking that continent by storm. They are absolutely sweeping. The AfD is polling to win the next general election in Germany, not least because of the problems of migration that they've had, especially recently. And if you look at the UK situation, I just think that Reform is not quite occupying that vacuum yet. And I'll tell you why I say that. It's because there are still elements within the Conservative Party that are able to flank Reform from the right. If you looked at Robert Jenrick's leadership campaign, he was saying things that Reform were not prepared to say. He was calling for mass deportations of illegal migrants. He was calling for a reduction of migration to zero, whereas Reform are still unprepared to have these conversations. And I think this idea that you need to play to the centre, this idea that you need to be moderate, I think fundamentally misunderstands the mood of the country. Because the mood of the country, and again, as I say, speaking as a young person, especially for young people, we want radicalism. We want something with a little bit of spice, a little bit of edge to it. We don't want this kind of milquetoast conservative kind of politics. You know, we want something that's actually going to change this country.
OK, Charlie, stay with us. Charlie Downs, political commentator, with us, telling it like it is, his view of Reform, a party of which he is one of those 141,000 plus people that are members, according to Reform UK's own website. This comes in from Gary, who says, the glaring difference between Reform and all other parties is its attitude to climate change. Labour, the Conservatives, Lib Dems are all obsessed with driving our economy into the ground in the pursuit of net zero. Reform, the only party that recognises the folly of that and offers something different. And you are kind of forced to think, well, if they were in the same way that Charlie was just saying, there is some are sensing that Reform's a very forthright approach to immigration, as an obvious example, has somewhat softened, small but significantly, in terms of what it once was. And, you know, are we likely to see that with things like net zero, that as we approach the next election, there are some changes there as well? Charlie Downs is with us, the political commentator. Let's move on to everybody's favourite politician, Charlie, Rachel Reeves. Experts have warned that she's heading for another tax raid as the economy continues to slug behind all expectations. Could this mean that she ends up breaking her pledge? And it's worth reminding ourselves of what she was promising in the budget.
I will not increase your national insurance. I will not increase your VAT, and I will not increase your income tax. Working people will not see higher taxes in their payslips as a result of the choices that I am making today. That is a promise made and a promise fulfilled.
There it is, no income tax, no VAT. Where's she going to get the money from, Charlie?
Well, from us, by the sounds of it. I mean, we were speaking before the break about the incredibly unimpressive offering from the Conservative Party, but I mean, let's not even get started on the Labour Party, my goodness. Rachel Reeves is one of these people who you look at her and you just think, how how have you managed to actually get this far? Because I work in, my day job is in politics, right? And I encounter people who work in the political world, and it's an incredibly cutthroat, incredibly Machiavellian, you meet some incredibly unscrupulous people in that world. And you look at someone like Rachel Reeves, who does appear to be a genuinely mediocre person in many different ways. And you just think, how the heck have you got to the position that you've got to? Anyway, aside from just insulting her, I do want to actually talk about this.
No, I absolutely share that. And it's true of so many politicians and even people who run industries as well, who somehow shinned up the corporate ladder or the political ladder. And no one's quite stopped to go, sorry, can we just take a step back 1 second? How good is this person? And you look at Rachel Reeves, and I know, she studied economics, and I'm sure she'd be all right on your pub quiz team, maybe. But I'm not looking for somebody to run the economy who's good on a pub quiz team. I want somebody who's got some real originality about them, some fire in their belly. I get none of this from her.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll get to the story in a sec, because it's easy and quite enjoyable to just sit here and slam Rachel Reeves because she is an impressive person. But you look at more broadly, you look at the type of person our political system selects for, and it seems to just be, every year, every election, they seem to just get worse. They seem to become more unimpressive, more just, completely blinkered. I was thinking, reading this story this morning, I couldn't help but think about the fact that there is the sense that the time horizon when we talk about economics and everything else, actually, for that matter, in the UK is like a couple of years. Like we're talking about in a couple of years. Like this story from the Mail talking about Reeves's tax hikes. It talks about April 2026. And then I sort of cast my mind to the east, and I think about China, and I think about the fact that they are thinking in the order of centuries. They are thinking, when they are doing their economic plans, they're thinking 40, 50, 60 years in the future. And I just look at our country and I think, we are floundering around, getting sort of caught up in these kind of trivial details of the here and now. And we're not thinking about the fact that this country is kind of, it's not in a good place. I mean, economically, we've had no growth for the last quarter, but beyond that, culturally, socially, it seems we're just breaking down, and that's largely due to immigration, but it's also due to a number of other things. It's everything I've been talking about so far on the program today. It's the fact that for my entire life, this country has been nothing more than a kind of flat economic zone. You look at the priorities of our leaders, you look at what Reeves is talking about today, and it's just the most kind of myopic, short-sighted kind of policy making. Because it's just, all that tax does is it makes people poorer. It does not improve the economy. We have this idea, or socialists have this idea that taxing people more is good for the economy, but it's not, because everywhere
it never will be. I mean, you don't
it
even
just
have
impoverishes.
To, even a GCSE in maths should tell you that much. But I doubt whether this lot are going to be learning that very obvious kind of schoolboy lesson anytime soon. Let's just get a quick word on hospital tax. Hospitals collecting 1.15 billion in car park fees from patients over the last 5 or 6 years. NHS Trust made an average of 665,000 a day from parking charges, with recent increase in fees. And most of that revenue comes from patients attending appointments, with the remainder, of course, coming from staff who curiously have to pay. Even if you're a neurosurgeon about to slice somebody's scalp off, you've still got to put your 50p in the meter before you can pick up a scalpel.
Yeah, well, Ian, what I'm about to say might sound a little bit flippant, but I promise you there is actually a very serious point here. My fiance, ever since I've been with her, she is so hyper aware of parking charges that she's so keen to park somewhere where you don't have to pay that we go on these, we'll park a mile away from the place we want to go to so we don't have to pay.
To avoid it, yeah.
Indeed. Because if you actually look at the kind of towns and cities, even the villages of Britain, there is nowhere that you can park without paying. And I actually think that says, as much as it is an annoyance, but as much as it might seem like something quite trivial, I think that actually says a lot about the priorities in this country, because it's like, it's just nickel and diming everywhere. And the fact, this story, that we are doing that even in hospitals where people are going to get treatment for potentially, maybe they might be dying. The fact you're making those people pay for the privilege of sitting and sitting there for a few hours is just insane. And actually, I'm very much in favour of the existence of the NHS. I think that universal healthcare paid for by the taxpayer is an incredibly good idea. As much as I was just criticising socialism, I do think there are certain things that, I really hate this American attitude that it's none of my business if my neighbour gets cancer, because it's kind of like that's your countryman, and maybe we should have a little bit more sort of, I don't know, compassion than that. But I think the NHS in its current form is a complete mess, and I think that it's in dire need of reform. And I think that this is one such area, because it's absurd to charge people for parking at hospitals.
Well, it's just become a thing, isn't it? Everything, the idea that any local authority or institution would not charge for parking is now unthinkable. They just wouldn't do that. It's just become... No one ever said, I tell you what, why don't we not charge for parking? Let's do that. Let's not charge for parking, because all right, you've got to upkeep the tarmac and stuff like that, and paint the lines and stuff. But it's become such a frenzy that it's now unthinkable that you would do anything else. Listen, final story, just a quick word on this if you could, Charlie. We are short of time. Just Stop Oil facing criticism for selling T-shirts. Nothing wrong with selling T-shirts, of course. It's a good thing if you're a campaign organisation. Frankie says you need one of those T-shirts that's got something emblazoned on the front. The problem that the Just Stop Oil cool cats have got is that these T-shirts were made in the Dominican Republic and were shipped 4,000 miles to the UK. So there's a little bit of a carbon footprint issue going on here. Not a good look for Just Stop Oil.
I think something that we have to move away from thinking of organisations like Just Stop Oil as being somehow radical, as being somehow, fighting the power. Because if you look at what Just Stop Oil are advocating for, it's in complete lockstep with what the government want, with what the civil service want, with what the HR departments of corporations like Amazon want, with what the NGOs want, with what the universities want, with what the media promote. They are the foot soldiers of the power structure that currently governs us. And so this narrative that they are somehow radical and fighting the power is complete nonsense. And so, we shouldn't be surprised that they don't kind of live their principles, that they do import T-shirts and merchandise from thousands of miles away, because they don't represent anything real. There is no authenticity to these organizations, because they exist to provide a kind of fashionable young face to what amount to state-sponsored programs that actually, when the rubber hits the road, make everyone poorer, as in the case of climate change. I actually think what your texter was saying about reform taking net zero and that sort of thing seriously is very true, because there is a real serious conversation to be had about the way in which environmental policies actually affect normal people. Because again, I'm very much in favour of protecting the environment. I think that this beautiful garden of a country that we have inherited, it is our duty to maintain it and make sure that it remains a natural and incredible place, beautiful environmental sort of concerns, and I just don't see the kind of politics that organisations like Just Stop Oil promote, and the interest groups that it represents, which are very powerful, wealthy lobbies. I don't think they have that vision. I think that this is kind of they lean more towards the Ed Miliband vision of environmentalism, which is just carpeting the countryside with industrial.
I think that's quite generous to call it a vision. It's a sort of obsession, maybe, but whatever it happens to be. Listen, Charlie, we stop there. It's still Christmas. We'll let you get back to the eggnog and twiglets. Charlie Downs with us, political commentator.